County Compassion Club show. My name is Jeremy. I'm your host today. Coming to you live from allpointstv.com. Glad to be back in the studio. I got John behind the camera making it happen.
You didn't sound too certain what your name there was. That kind of concerns me. Did you run into the wall again? Or?
I did actually. Right here, see that? It was a chair. But anyways, how's everybody doing today? Glad to be back in the studios. It's a beautiful fall day. We are now in the official fall season. We got a nice cool rain going on outside, about 60 degrees. So a word to the wise, if you're growing outside, shake your plants. All right, shake that water off there, keep them fresh. Don't want to get no bud mold in there. But hey, we're going to be talking about medical marijuana on the show today, as we usually do. Going to let you know what's happening down at the Genesee County Compassion Club and what's going on around the state. We've had some busy times going on here. I know everybody's all up in arms about the new bills that have passed. We're going to talk about that some more today. We covered some of those last time we were in the studio here. We had the esteemed councilman Eric Gunnels with us. Very appreciative of him showing up in the studio, helping us decipher some of the information that we received. And as you know, while we were on the podcast 2 weeks ago, the governor or the House passed the law, and then within just a couple days, boom, the governor signed these laws into law. So it is official. These new laws are laws. They're not just bills anymore. And because of the voting that took place, the majority of the voting that took place, I think it was 80-some%, well over 75%, well over the supermajority mark, the bills do take immediate effect. I know that this says in the bills that it take 90 days to take effect. They take immediate effect because they had the supermajority signature. Now, when that actually gets played out, how it works out remains to be seen. I don't expect Lara to be, scrambling right away, but maybe they are. I hear that there's going to be obviously a board put together that's part of the law that describes what's going to happen. But we're going to get into those details and more on the show today. Going to talk about them in a little bit more in depth and try to get you guys up to speed with what's happening. I know it's definitely the main concern that's happening, so we're going to talk about that today. All right. Before we do that, I want to bring everybody up to speed of what's been happening down at the Genesee County Compassion Club. And I'll tell you what's been happening. Good stuff. That's what's been happening. We had our Adopt a Highway. It was the final one of the season. We just completed that on Saturday. Cleaned up M13. Beautiful spot out there between Beecher and Potter Road. I think Beecher and Juddville. Actually, Juddville goes that way. But at any rate, 2-mile section out there on M13. We've been doing this now for 7 years. And I got to tell you what, that section of the highway is clean. It's beautiful. And that's thanks to you guys. So thank you for all the volunteers that came out and participated in our Adopt a Highway program. We're very proud to be able to be a participant in Michigan's program to help keep our highways clean. And we definitely do our job. It's beautiful out there. So thank you guys. The day before that, we had our most awesome soup kitchen. It was the last Friday of the month in September there. So we busted out the soup kitchen there at the North End Soup Charities, North End Charities right there, the Catholic Charities on Stewart, and served up a wonderful meal. And I appreciate all our volunteers that showed up to take care of that. We had Matt cooking it up in the kitchen as always. Thank you very much for making tasty food for everybody down there.
Wouldn't that be in the last one in August? Because this is September.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one in August then.
Well, I mean, we had to do it because I think Friday is the last. Okay. This Friday. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But they had another date, so we had bumped it up a week. So it was our last Friday. All right, John. We like to be on time. We're never behind the ball. You know what I'm saying? So, anyways, but yeah, we did. We got down there to the soup kitchen and served, and it's a privilege for us to be able to do that. I got to meet the director. Actually, just bumped into him outside. Outside non-work obviously, but the director of the food bank, and nice gentleman, really nice person, and he definitely appreciates all the efforts that we put in down at the Genesee County Compassion Club. And like I said, it's a privilege for us to be able to participate. I know John, who runs the charities over there and part of the soup kitchen, he definitely appreciates the work that we put in, and certainly all the members that come in there and eat. Definitely appreciate it. So the cobbler's legendary. I mean, everybody knows about that. So I think it speaks for itself. Great job, you members. Thank you so much for showing up and participating and making that an important part of what we do. Positive outreach into the community is one of the most important things that the fledgling marijuana industry has to have involvement in. And without that, it's just a bunch of money grubbers out there trying to do their thing, get what's theirs, whatever. I mean, it's bigger than that. We have to be involved in our community. We got to look out for each other. And that's what our Compassion Club does. So I'm privileged. I'm happy to be a part of it. And I thank you for making that a key component of what it is that we do down at the Genesee County Compassion Club. So, all right, I'm going to get on here, talk about the news. I know everybody's been talking about the debates, presidential debates, blah, blah, blah. I didn't hear either one of them talking about anything to do with marijuana. They didn't talk about much, frankly, and that's about all I got to say about that. I think they both suck. But you pick whoever you want for president. That's the beauty of our country, right? So let's talk about Michigan. Let's talk about marijuana. We got some new laws that were just passed. They were signed by Governor Snyder. He quickly and happily signed these bills, which will now be charging 3% tax on medicine for patients. And of course, this is for the new program that will be implemented here probably within the next year. If you look at the wording in the bills, it states that they have X number of months to get their commission together, to form the board, to get the rules and regulations in place for the new centers and processors and growers and dispensaries. And they have just about a year's time, actually 12 months, to start issuing licenses. So that's their deadline that they're going to be dealing with. Of course, this is stemming from the LARA department, and they're going to form a new department, if you will. The bill has extensive language for the number of people that the department will be hiring. I think it's a total of like 115 new employees at the LARA department, plus an additional 34 state police officers. So this is a large government program that was passed, and it certainly is going to have an impact on our state financially and otherwise. And it's going to take some time to put together. So I know there's a lot of speculation as to how this is going to happen, when, how much, all these questions that people have. And the bottom line is right now is we don't have those answers. Unless you're one of the insiders who's kind of like, maybe paying to make this thing happen, and certainly probably has more info than the average man does. We're the average man here on this show, and we don't have any more information than you do. The truth of the matter is that the state is going to be putting this board together. They've got a year to do so, and once that is completed, then they will begin accepting applications for everything from the processing centers to the growing centers to the to the dispensaries. They're going to be licensing testing facilities, and they'll also be licensing transporting companies. So you got 5 different businesses that they're going to be specifically licensing just for medical marijuana. These license fees that are going to go along with this, one of the license fees is capped at $10,000. So we don't know what the fees are going to be. We know they're going to be at least $10,000 or less. So, and that depends on what type of license it is that you're requesting. If you're asking for a transport license, that fee is going to be different. So there's going to be a lot of conjuring, kind of, jockeying, sort of figuring out where people want to fit into this if they want to participate. And from what I see so far, it's going to be people who have some pretty deep pockets. Now, I might be lived to see, that to the contrary. I hope I do. I hope I get to see real small business growth by small people. But for now, it looks like you're going to have some deep pockets. So at any rate, the state's going to put this program together. They're going to start issuing licenses, and then, somewhere along the lines, they're going to issue some rules and some things that we can actually see and go by. But until then, it's sort of everybody's out there trying to figure it out for themselves. And I've heard all kinds of rumors. I've heard rumors that the licenses are already spoken for. I'm sure there's people out there that would like us to believe all of that so that there's no competition. And the truth is, we really don't know. Maybe it'll be a Canadian company like Prairie Plant Systems that comes in and, gets all the licenses. I don't know. I mean, I do know this. There was basically this new program passed, and we have the current program already in place. Obviously, this was passed by Michigan voters back in 2008. It's the Michigan Medical Marijuana Law as we know it today, and it exists with patients and caregivers. And what I can tell you about the new law is that, I know it doesn't really affect the current program. There are some changes that do affect patients and caregivers, but overall, the program of a caregiver being able to have 5 patients, being able to grow 12 plants for each one of those patients, that has not changed. The program of a patient being able to elect a caregiver, that has not changed. The part where the patient can grow for themselves 12 plants, that has not changed either. So the main core, the main makeup of how our current medical marijuana law works and how it is proceeded has not received any changes from these new laws that have been passed. There are some changes, though, and I don't want it to be that be an all-inclusive statement. So let me back up by saying there are some things that will affect patients and caregivers that were passed in these new bills. Now, the details of what those are, I can give you a synopsis of those and things to watch out for. All right, but being that this law is so fresh and so new, and being that there has not yet been a board formed who has issued guidelines and regulations and applications, we can't say for sure exactly how those changes will impact us or what exactly those changes are. It's one of those tricky things about when you get a bill or a law that is passed into law, is that unfortunately it doesn't come with a manual of what does this law mean. They just pass the law and that's it. And then everybody else out there to decipher for themselves, attorneys, judges, politicians, to decipher what does it mean. And you've heard the famous quote before, I've said it on the show before, where we had, I think it was our federal senator, Nancy Pelosi, who said, well, we don't know what's in the bill until we pass it. We can't read the bill until we pass it. And unfortunately, that's ridiculous as it is, but there's a little bit of truth to that. And the truth part of it is in the details of you don't know exactly how this law is going to be enforced, and you don't know exactly what the judges are going to say the law actually meant. Just like we had with our own medical marijuana law when it passed back in 2008. And if you were there back at the very beginning, you would know that at that time, there was an immense amount of speculation as to how this program was going to work. And then you could see, if you read the papers, that there were multiple different ways that people went out to try to participate in the current law. Some people had mailbox programs. Some people did delivery programs. You've seen dispensaries. Obviously, we have a compassion club. There's collectives. There's other forms of medical marijuana businesses, ways for patients and caregivers to meet each other. They're out there, and they're named a myriad of different names. How they operate, they do vary. There's variances in how these people are doing things, but they all believe that they are doing it according to the law that was passed in 2008 and according to the guidelines that are set therein. And that, my friends, is where the sticky part begins. This is interpretation. And just like we have interpretation going on and have had it going on in our current medical marijuana law, it's going to continue to go on with the new law that has been passed as well. So when we talk about some of the changes that have been put through in this law regarding current patients and caregivers, we have to understand that we are still interpreting this new law. And we might not have the interpretation correct. Even if you're an attorney, you might not have it correct, because ultimately it's going to be individual cases in front of judges that will be making those decisions for the rest of us, as you have seen with our current law in the past 8 years that we've had it. So take everything that you hear with a grain of salt. When somebody says, well, you can't do this because it just got passed, or did you hear about this new law, or did you have to take everything with a grain of salt. And I think you always have to put a little bit of common sense into what it is that you think you should be doing. It's important to make sure, number one, that you're doing it for the patient, whether you are the patient yourself or whether you're the caregiver taking care of the patient. What you're doing should be for your patient, and it should add up that way. Walks like a duck, talks like a duck, probably is a duck. And what I mean by that is your methods of what it is you do should look like what it is you say you're doing. All right? And to a police officer, that's one of the most important things that you can do. So you got to walk the talk, just not just talk it. All right? And when we talk about these changes here, let's take everything into a grain of salt, because number one, we don't know the full interpretation of them. And number two, we have to make sure that what we're doing is with the patient's needs in mind. All right. So one of the things is labeling. There's a section in the new law that talks about other forms of cannabis needing to be labeled. And the labeling, some of the labeling requirements, if you look at what they're asking for, are relative to them coming from a testing facility or them coming from a production facility. And if you're a caregiver or you're a patient, obviously these edible forms didn't come from there. So not everything that is mentioned in the law as far as what might be needed on the label is necessarily even available. And so we have to take that into consideration. I think obviously labeling is important. It's important for dosage. Obviously your patients need to know what they're getting so that they can have some idea of how that's going to affect them. Number two, it needs to be labeled for caution so that if someone was to see that or get their hands on it, at least they could understand that it is medicine and it is not something else that might be mistaken for just a food product or some type of other form. Who knows? Some of the types of cannabis that we've seen out there could be construed as some type of street drug. So for your own safety, it's a good idea to have things labeled, what it is, where it came from, when it was made, who it's going to, how much is there. All of those things are going to help you out, and all of those things are now going to be required by law. So when you look at the new labeling requirements, it's going to be your obligation to make sure that you're filling out as much information as possible and putting that on your product. And again, this is something that is brand new. This is something that's now going to be required because now with one of the new bills that's now law, it's stating that you do have express permission as a patient or a caregiver to have other forms of cannabis besides just flower form. However, they want to see labels on these items to be able to decipher who they're going to, where they came from, how much is there, and so on and so forth. I think it's going to take time for us to see exactly what detail is going to be required. Again, this is still dependent on the board that is yet to be formed by LARA. So when we see their format for how they want things labeled, for the information that they're going to be requiring on there, how it should be laid out, and so on and so forth, then we'll know rock solid exactly what our labels should be and where they should be at, and so on and so forth. Until then, it's kind of a crapshoot, and you're going to have to do the very best that you can to ensure compliance. And that right there is the common sense factor that I was talking about. So things like maybe an expiration date would be a good idea. But certainly things like dosage, caution, this is medicine, where it came from, who it's going to, those types of things are certainly in your interest to protect you legally and to protect your patient and to make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands unknowingly. Okay? So the next thing is the actual, I guess a better way to put this besides weight would be volume. And we're talking about limits on other forms of cannabis. So we know that as a patient or caregiver, current law has not changed. You can still have 2.5 usable ounces of medication if you are a patient. When it comes to other forms of cannabis, such as like say a brownie, or let's say Simpson oil, or let's say wax, now these items, because they are specifically listed in the new law, these items now have a different requirement for their weight. Okay, so it's not just what they physically weigh any longer. If you have a 16-ounce fluid medicated item, that is now going to be considered 1 ounce of usable medication. So that's just one example. There's also requirements in there for solid forms, like I mentioned, like for a brownie, and there's a requirement or limitation for a gaseous form, which I'm not sure what gaseous forms of medical cannabis would be. Maybe somebody out there could let us know what they think that is talking about. But the majority of medication that I've seen out there that is not in flower form is either going to be considered a solid or a liquid. And these items now have physical requirements as to what they are going to be counted as, regardless of what the potency of that item is. So let's say, for example, you had the fluid requirement where it's talking about you could have 12 fluid ounces being considered 1 ounce of medication. I guess technically that could be 12 fluid ounces of Simpson oil, since Simpson oil is actually a fluid. And don't get mad at me. I didn't make these rules up, and I know that doesn't make sense. Especially if you're comparing that to a 12 ounce, let's say, medicated soda. Certainly, there's a big difference there in the amount of medication that's in that 12 ounces. Does not make sense the way that it's being regulated, but that's what they did. And that's what happens when you have politicians getting involved in things that they don't know what they're talking about. But at any rate, that's where we're at right now. That's what the requirement is. And you need to look at those things. If you are a caregiver who is making other forms of cannabis for your patients, you need to understand what the new requirements are. And for things like wax, shatter, dabs, that kind of stuff, you're going to want to look at the solid form. Some of the forms out there, though, that we use for dabbing, if you will, are in sort of a honey-like substance that's going to be liquid. So it's going to be, there's no plasma requirement, okay? There's no gel limitation or requirement. It is either liquid, gas, or solid. And so you're going to have to take a look at your item that you're making for your patient or making for yourself and decide what exactly it is. Is it hard, or can you pour it? You know what I mean? And if it's a gas, tell me what the heck that is, because I don't know what it is. But these are now the new requirements you're going to have to go by. You're going to need to look those up. You need to make sure that they're labeled, and you're going to make sure that you're protecting yourself. Another big item is if you are a caregiver and you are transporting your other forms of cannabis, your edibles, to your patient, there is a requirement that could be construed in the new law that it might be applicable to you to have these labelings on there as well. So, if you are in fact transporting your other forms of cannabis, first of all, you need to make sure it's inaccessible. It cannot be accessible to anyone in the vehicle, period. So, i.e., it should be some type of case in a trunk, out of reach, out of sight, out of mind. All right. But in addition to that, with the new requirements, let's say you're carrying more than what would be allowed for one patient, you're going to want to make sure you have labels on those to make sure you can show that, hey, this set of brownie cakes is for patient A, this set of brownie cakes or whatever it is for patient B. All right, because we got names on the labels. So that's something else you're going to need to be aware of. Is it cumbersome? Absolutely. But it is something that is now written into that law. Now, this is one of the things that we can back up a little bit and talk about interpretation, because when you look at the law and how it's laid out, it could be arguable of whether or not the labeling process for transportation is applicable to patients and caregivers, or if it is only applicable to processing centers and newly licensed dispensaries. And I think that that's something that's going to get argued in court. You might tell me I'm wrong. Hey, like I said before, I'm not an attorney. And even if you are an attorney, it could still get argued in court, and you know it will be. So, I think the biggest thing is, like I said before, when it comes to everyday usage, taking care of your patients, taking care of yourself, use common sense. I mean, number one, if your cannabis is inaccessible and it is nowhere near you in the vehicle, there's a good possibility you're not even going to have an issue. You shouldn't be having to answer questions about your medical marijuana because it isn't even knowledgeable to the officer who's pulling you over. I mean, I'm not saying you're trying to conceal it. I'm just saying that you have it properly stored and put away to the point where it's a non-issue. And that's the way it should be treated. If you've got a tray of brownies rolling around in the back of the trunk, unless the cops, got the brownie nose, how else is he going to know? You know what I mean? And again, it's not about concealing. It's about just being smart, having things put where they should be, having, your ducks in a row, being within your limits. There's all common sense things that you can do that should help you avoid ever being in the position where you have to go to court and try to decipher what these things mean. Okay? All right, that's it for that. I'm not going to get too much into more detail because, I think the important thing is we have to remember all the information on these new laws is not out yet. The governor just signed these things. The ink's still wet. All right, we have to wait for LARA to do what it is that they're now required to do by law, and that is form a board and start to decipher, start to build this new program so we can see how it's going to operate and work. And I think that, in my estimate, I think that this is really more of a ploy to expand a market and prepare a market for a recreational model. I do not believe that this current program that they just passed is really meant to suffice off from the current medical marijuana population. You have 100,000 or so patients in the state right now. You have somewhere between 20 and 30,000 caregivers in the state right now, and from the most part, I think people are getting access to their medication. People are able to conduct their business in a professional, legal manner. Taxes are being collected. Businesses are being leased. There is economy that is being built from this, and I do not believe that if you just arbitrarily create another system to service that same market, that it's going to be a gangbuster for you. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Surely you're going to capture some of the market, and some patients are going to say, you know what, I don't want to mess around with the caregiver thing anymore. I just want to go to CVS, get my meds or whatever else it's called, and be done with it. And, for those people out there that want to do that, more power to you. You should have access to your medication no matter what. But I think for the majority of the patients out there and the caregivers out there, they're going to understand that this is not just a medicine, but it's also an economy for these people in Michigan. and they're going to understand that by, relinquishing their current rights and going to the new guy, you're putting the current economy out of business. And I think that's something that the majority of people out in Michigan today are very sensitive about. We're tired of seeing the Wall Street get richer while the rest of us continue to go down the drain. And this is something that has come into Michigan and has spawned a whole lot of economic growth and activity. There are businesses in the areas that have been allowed to function. There are businesses that have sprouted up all over the place. And certainly not just dispensaries and collectives and compassion clubs, but also grow centers, doctors' offices, things like this that have gone in, testing facilities that are now leasing spaces that were previously vacant, and employing people that were previously unemployed. So this is tax revenue that's being generated that our legislators did not want to address or talk about or acknowledge. And I think that's a loss on their part. So we'll have yet to see how the new system is going to operate. As I said, I don't think that the current customer base for medical marijuana in Michigan, which is your medical marijuana patients, 100,000 people approximately, I don't think that a new program that requires 150 new state employees just to simply regulate it is going to be financially stable or able to bear the weight of itself on the current customer base that's available. So, even if every one of them switched over, it'd still be an incredible, cumbersome debt that they would have to overtake and overcome in order to make it stable. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But at any rate, that's where we're at. We've got about 12 months for this thing to be hashed out. I'm sure that LARA will be right on time because it's required by law for them to do so. I've seen some charts. You can go to Michigan Medical Marijuana Association.org and look at a timeline. Brad Forrester put together a timeline for how this is going to be laid out. And I don't agree with everything on there, but I love Brad and I think he did a very nice job on the timeline. If things are ready for market within a year, or within 3 months after the applications are permitted. So we're talking March of 2017. I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen, or 2018, excuse me. I don't think it's going to happen that quick, but it might. And, this is one of those things that we're going to have to watch, wait, and see. So, if the 200 licenses, or if there's going to be a cap on licenses, I've heard 200 is a number. I don't know if that's true. I've heard that the licenses are spoken for. I don't know if that's true. I know that there's a lot of folks out there that are going to be applying, from what I've been told, but I haven't heard from a lot of patients, and so I'm kind of interested to hear from patients what they feel about this. I know that there's some patients in certain areas in the state that have been denied medication because of the local ways that have been, imposed upon them. They haven't been able to get access. They can't find a caregiver. There's no place for them to go to find a caregiver. So how the heck are they supposed to find medication? So I can see the dilemma in certain areas of the state and the necessity for some of these patients to be able to access tested, regulated medication. Certainly in the cases of someone dealing with a minor where the parent has to be the caregiver but may not necessarily want to be the caregiver, that might be the ideal situation for them. So I don't want to discredit what has been done, but I think we have to look at the whole picture and see what has already been done and give credit where it's due. So at any rate, this is where we're at. This is what's happening here in Michigan. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the fall. We've got a number of states out there that are looking to pass recreational marijuana. So this is certainly an expanding thing across the country, and I expect that it would be the same thing here in Michigan. I've already heard a couple different rumors of a couple different groups in Michigan that are wanting to put together ballot language for a recreational thing. When that happens, we'll see it. We'll read it. We'll talk to you about it on the program and find out if we can support it. I think the big thing is that you're seeing this obviously change across the country gradually, and I believe that the legislators in Michigan acknowledge that by passing these bills, because I think, again, like I said before, I think that this new program is really just a precursor for the program that will be running the system when it goes to recreational for adult use. And that might happen in 2 years, maybe it happens in 4 years here in Michigan, we don't know. But I think that that's what this program was designed to do, was to simply open the door to that. So when we are available and ready to go to a recreationalized market, the industry will already be set, standardized, regulated, and there will be a process in place for further advancement. I know that might sound good to some folks, and it might be a good thing in the future. But I think as long as they continue to try to put down patients and not really address their needs, they're sort of missing the punch. And it seemed to me that the major priority behind this legislation was to, number one, collect taxes, and number two, put a regulation on the market. When in fact there's already many regulations being placed on the market itself. When I'm talking about medical marijuana, of course. You look at the different ordinances that have been passed around Michigan. You look at the current law that exists. Look at the conjunction of the other laws that affect how businesses are ran in general. And I believe that it is already a regulated market. However, obviously the government felt it needed to be further regulated. And one of the quotes that was repeated over and over again was that the medical marijuana market in Michigan is the wild, wild west. It's out of control. And I don't think that's really actually the case. I know that there's some bad apples in the bunch. There's always going to be some bad apples. We got to deal with those when they come up and treat them as they are. But I think the majority of the folks that are in the program and have been in the program are in it for the right reasons and are doing it the right way. And so I think with that, we have to remember that even though these new bills have come out and we still have the old system, we're not criminals. All right, we're patients looking to get treatment in the way that we feel is the most beneficial for our health, in a way that is congruent with what our physicians are recommending to be done. And I believe that the majority of people in the program here are doing it for the right reasons, that they have a legitimate need for the medicine. And as we have seen, this is in fact truly medicine. It's undoubtedly medicine. And I think that as more people are starting to get educated to that, it's becoming more accepted. So that's a good thing. So there are progresses going on. It is still a positive light here in Michigan. You know, you have to remember, folks, that there are states out there like Oklahoma where you will not get medical marijuana. You know, there are a lot of states. In fact, we have just gotten to a majority recently within this year that the majority of the states in the U.S. do have some form of either medical marijuana or decriminalized marijuana. But that means that there is still almost a near majority of the states out there that have nothing. And so we got to remember those poor folks in other states that do not have access to this wonderful medication, that are still stuck on the prescriptions, on the dead-end paths that are being given to them, and there's a better thing out there for them. So it's nice to see that. It's nice to see people waking up, and hopefully we can continue to do so. I think that the biggest thing that we have had, besides the economic growth and so on, is the breakthroughs in the anecdotal evidence that we've seen from patients using this as medicine. It is absolutely astounding, the effects and the different arrays that this can be applied in. And I think that that's the beauty of the current system. So hopefully we can continue that through true caregiving, through true patients getting helped out, getting the needs met. And, I think that that's the most important thing right there. So with that, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you very much for allowing me to come on the show today, John. Being back in the studio, it's always good to be here at allpointstv.com. Please check out their other podcast right on YouTube. You can look at their channel at All Points TV and see what's going on here in the city of Flint. It's a beautiful thing to get real news and information because you ain't going to get it on the major networks. All right? Thanks for joining me here. I'm your host, Jeremy. This is the Genesee County Compassion Club Show. You guys have a great week.